Stand before you in the name of the Lord, who was, who is, and who is to come, the Almighty.
Amen.
My microphone volume might indicate the Almighty, even without me. I think they say that it's a little hot. Summer's coming. But in all seriousness, I'm grateful to be gathered with you on this, the sixth Sunday of the Easter season, as we continue our journey through an examination of the texts in Acts. The Acts of the Apostles offer us a great deal of thought and encouragement as we reflect on what the early church looked like and the happenings as they unfolded before the people who endeavored to follow Jesus in those first days without him as a guide. So as Mother Marcy and I looked at these texts in sequence, we tried to come up with titles that might both be indicative of the story that we would be reading, but also might be something that each of us could relate to in the sense of it could also be true of us. So this Sunday, the title was, "And She Prevailed." And this notion of how the woman in this story from Acts prevailed in her persistence and in the observation of Paul and others that God was, in fact, with her. And sometimes we need this reminder ourselves that, indeed, we, with Christ, we, as we endeavor to be with God, also prevail. Now, it's interesting to consider how some of the stories in Acts unfold. You can tell that it's in stops and starts, and that people are still figuring out this whole following Jesus without having Jesus to literally follow will work. Some 2,000 years later, we're still working on just what that looks like, I think. But the reality is they go forth boldly in their steps. And the story is captured later. This is true of pretty much any story that's written down for us. Is the reality is it's in the past, and it's much harder to tell the story as it happens. Maybe you've noticed this in your own lives as you've tried to tell a story. Maybe it's a story that's ongoing. And when you're trying to tell of a circumstance or a situation or an ongoing conflict that you might be in or an ongoing struggle that you are facing, that as you tell it, there's too many uncertainties to really tell it well. And what's more, the emotion of telling it can be outright overwhelming. Can you imagine what it was like for Paul as he endeavored to tell the world about the resurrected Lord? Now, we might like to think it's easier today in the world of social media and telecommunications, but I'll tell you, I've tweeted about the resurrected Lord and still not everybody knows about it. So I know that it's not, and I think in all deference to Paul, he really set out to be strategic. Right? I think he really thought this is so important and of such significance that we need to be deliberate, because he really, I think, wanted to share this news of the risen Lord with the entire world. And so I think he was trying to be strategic and not just, imagine if we had news of Jesus to share, even the collective here, if we went and tried to tell the whole world, we might start on Twitter or Facebook, but pretty soon we'd be trying to figure out who's going up and down Greenville and who's going up and down Royal, and before you know it, we're spread out, and it gets out of hand pretty quickly, right? Because it's a moving and living and changing thing. And so Paul is trying to be strategic, and if you read through the book of Acts with a Bible dictionary in one hand and an atlas in the other, and maybe even make a copy of the atlas, because by the time you start making pencil marks about where he's trying to go, it gets pretty confusing, and you realize that while he's maybe setting out to be strategic, he's taking some detours along the way. And some of those detours happen because he has visions and dreams, and that the Spirit of God overwhelms him. Now, I think we do have good news to share. God has moved in our lives. The resurrected Lord has been manifest before us. The sacraments we receive transform us, and we need to set about sharing this news with the entire world. And I hope that we can at least set out to be strategic. It's good to have a plan, but I hope also that we'll recognize the Spirit welling up within us at times and guiding us in a divergent plan. Because as we go from this place, and as we walk in faith trying to follow Jesus, there will be times where the Spirit guides us towards a person in need. I was delighted. In the last year, I've had at least 3 different people come and say to me, your sermons must be working. Now, that was enough to delight me, but they gave particular instances of what they did, and at least 3 of these people came and said, I saw someone broken down on the side of the road. I don't think I've even preached, stop and help the people. Literally, but they heard the encouragement, and they knew that this was somebody that they could help, and so that they should help, and that they stopped. And I have to know that it made a difference for the person who was broken down on the side of the road, because that day they witnessed God's love and compassion. There was a time while we were living in Hawaii that I thought, not everybody should, I don't feel comfortable asking everybody to stop and help a stranger on the side of the road. And I thought, I should probably stop and help more people. I don't want my wife to stop with the kids, that's a different complication. I thought, I'm going to just stop. Every time I see someone, I'll just stop on the side of the road. And what I learned by doing this over the course of months and years of stopping every time I saw someone broken down on the side of the road, and if you show up to a meeting late and said, sorry, I stopped and helped someone broken down on the side of the road, most people will forgive you. It's one thing that I learned. I also learned that if you're my size and you get off a motorcycle and you walk up to a car on the side of the road, that they'll only roll down the window about this much. And almost always the first words out of their mouth is, I'm fine. I've already called for help. And if you say, are you sure? They say, yes, we're good. So maybe I'm not the best person to be stopping on the side of the road either. I only had to help push a few cars out of the way and make a few phone calls. Mostly folks had already gotten the help they needed, which is good. I'm not very mechanical. But I believe that they knew, at least in a glimpse, of God's love and compassion. Now, I'm not the betting type. But I would wager that at some point in the lives of every person in this room, you have felt an inner urging to help somebody. It may have been somebody on the side of the road. It may have been this inner urging that you need to call a friend that you haven't heard from lately. It may be the notion that you need to go visit somebody you know is struggling. Showing up with pie is also always a good idea. I'm just going to lay that out there in terms of forms of encouragement and knowing that God's love and compassion exist in the world. Pie says it pretty well. But the reality is, if we all have these urgings, that I hope, like Paul in Acts, will listen to them. No matter how good of a plan and strategy we have set before us to share God's good news with the world, it's the movement of the Spirit as it wells up within us that guides us where we need to be the most. And I hope, with a little bit of encouragement, we'll recognize that those plans and the strategy were nice and they were good, but sometimes they need to be brought out of the way so that that inner urging can pull us towards the people with the greatest need. Because when we do that, God prevails. And the love and compassion of God are shown through our very lives. And love prevails.